Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started. It's so nice to see everyone. My name is Beth Keane. I'm the CEO of Holocaust Museum LA, and welcome to tonight's opening exhibition reception for To Paint is to Live, Art and Resistance in Theresienstadt. We have a really exciting panel discussion in store for you. This new exhibition was conceived, designed, and curated by our talented Chief Curator of Collections, Christie Jovanovic, and Jordana Gessler, our Chief Impact Officer, who is actually in Israel right now and sends her regards. She was really upset she couldn't be here with us, but she's on a fabulous program or mission right now in Israel. I want to extend a special thank you to Christie's, the world's leading art and luxury business, for generously sponsoring To Paint is to Live exhibition. With hate crime surging, is this on? Okay. With hate crime surging and hitting modern records nationwide, including a 48% jump in anti-Semitic hate crimes just in Los Angeles last year, Holocaust Museum LA's mission is more critical than ever. By teaching the critical lessons and continued relevance of the Holocaust, we are empowering students and visitors daily to speak up and stand up against hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism. And as you can see from the construction along the Grove Drive, we broke ground on the Building Truth Capital Campaign project, which we're very excited about. We have plans to double our footprint right here in Pan Pacific Park so that we can actually amplify our reach and impact, welcoming 150,000 students every year and 500,000 visitors. So that is how we all stay positive for those of us who work at the museum, knowing that we are making a positive impact and what the future has in store for us. So it is my honor, before we actually start the program, we have a special guest with us. Where is the ambassador? It is my honor to introduce the Consul General of the Czech Republic, Ambassador Jaroslav Osha Jr., who's going to share a few words before I introduce the panel tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this exhibition. It is an honor to be here, and I'm really very much happy that Czech Republic is associated with this event. I have been to Theresienstadt a couple of years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago with my son. And for us, the Czechs, Terezín and Lidice, the city which was destroyed by the Nazis, is still very much in a memory of all the people. And I'm really pleased that even in such far away as LA and California, this is being remembered. We very much follow, of course, the situation which is going now in the Middle East and Israel and Gaza. And as you well know, Czech Republic is one of those countries which are very clear supporters of Israel. For us, the relationship with the country is important, as it is with our past, because it's important. And we really are pleased that the past is still remembered. We do our best. I know many of you will say, we should invest more into the preparations of Theresienstadt. It's so huge and so difficult to keep it, but we really still do our best. We are against the hate crime rises. We are, of course, very much fighting the anti-Semitism, and we really hope the situation will get better. But one of the ways how to do it is to remember the past. As a historian myself, I know that past should not be forgotten. And I'm really happy that the museum is doing such a work and we can really keep the memories alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Olsha Jr. We're also very grateful to the Czech Consulate for their generous support of this exhibit. And it's heartwarming to have partners like the Czech Consulate and for the community to come together for events like this, because during these challenging times, it's just really an important reminder that we do have a strong community that stands united. So it means a lot to us. So thank you to everyone for being here tonight. So now on to tonight's program. Established by the Nazis on November 24th, 1941, in the garrison town of Terezín, northwest of Prague, Theresienstadt functioned both as a ghetto and a concentration camp. Theresienstadt played a critical role in the Nazi government's deceptive propaganda to hide their genocidal aims. The Nazis presented Theresienstadt as a model settlement, or spa town, but the harsh reality was that it was a place of torture, violence, and murder. To paint is to live reveals the profound role of art as a form of resistance and in reaffirming human dignity as prisoners turn to creative expression to assert their identity, chronicle their existence, and honor their cultural heritage in the face of unspeakable atrocities. Through art clandestinely drawn, hidden, and recovered, this exhibit explores daily life in Theresienstadt, delving into the powerful narratives of endurance, bravery, and resilience through the works of 4 remarkable artists: Erich Lichtblau-Leskly, Fred Beckmann, Moritz Müller, and Leo Haas, each of whom endured the harrowing conditions of Theresienstadt. In addition to the artifacts from Holocaust Museum LA's archival collection included in the exhibit, we are honored to display objects, documents, and photographs on loan and donated by Paulette and Ron Nessim, Wendy Shapiro and Vivian Lane, George Fogelson, and Randy Schoenberg, as well as materials from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Czech Jewish Museum in Prague, and Yad Vashem. It truly does take a village to curate exhibits like this. We're also proud to include video testimony from Peter Daniels, who is one of the few children who survived Theresienstadt and was an active volunteer in our community for many years, sharing his testimony with countless students. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panel, who will tell us more about the exhibit and discuss how art and design shape our connection to history. Paulette Nessim is a member of our executive board and the daughter of Fred Beckmann, an architect whose sketches not only depicted faces of his fellow inmates, but also captured the physical structures of Theresienstadt. Paulette's mother, Ava, also survived the Holocaust. Hagy Belzberg is a member of the museum's board of directors and chief architect of both of our existing award-winning building and our expansion. Hagy is the founding partner of BA Collective, one of the top architecture and design firms in Los Angeles. Christie Jovanovic is our museum's extraordinary chief curator of collections. And leading our panel today, we have Jessie Handler, our creative programs manager, who is the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. So, Jessie, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Beth. My name is Jessie Handler, and I am the Creative Programs Manager at Holocaust Museum LA. Through my work at the museum, I see the firsthand impact of art as not only a catalyst for change, but a space of reflection, hope, and resistance, which are themes woven into the history we will be discussing tonight. Established by the Nazis in 1941, Theresienstadt was a ghetto camp that played a critical role in the Nazi government's deceptive propaganda. Nazi statements euphemistically referred to the deportation of Jews from Central and Western Europe as resettlement to the East. To counter public skepticism surrounding the resettlement, the Nazis presented Theresienstadt as a model settlement or spa. However, the harsh reality was that Theresienstadt was a place meant to facilitate death and deportations to killing centers in Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe, such as Auschwitz, Majdanek, and Treblinka. Despite the atrocious and dehumanizing conditions, cultural activities flourished at Theresienstadt. Religious practice, education, music, theater, drawing, and painting were all tolerated to an extent by the SS guards. While these cultural pursuits were in stark contrast to the daily struggle to survive, they represented a means for prisoners to cope with and demonstrate resistance to the situation they were forced into, as well as channel their hope for a better future. Christie, as the co-curator of the exhibit, how does this exhibition shed light on the importance of art as a form of resistance, particularly in the context of Theresienstadt?
So I think obviously central to the exhibition is art as a means of resistance, because, you know, particularly in Theresienstadt, where we're talking about, as you said, a place where was essentially used as a propaganda tool by the Nazis, but also was a place where people who were, you know, Jewish intellectuals in the community, important, prominent people, musicians, artists, these were people that were sent to Theresienstadt under the guise of it being a spa town. So, you know, really in terms of, you know, just the notion of that as a propaganda tool, and art and music and other cultural activities that were taking place in the camp. You see this real proliferation of people who are imprisoned there creating art as a means of resistance. So not only as a means of survival, but as a means of resisting the dehumanizing conditions, as a means of resisting the brutal treatment that they were receiving, just really as a means of holding on to their humanity. So you see, you know, a really good example of this is Erich Lichtblau-Leskly, who in some of his testimony says, for me to not paint would be not to live, which is where the title of the exhibit comes from. So, you know, it's really a means of survival. You know, he's creating and documenting conditions in the camp and creating art, but also clearly from his statements, it's imperative to his survival and a means of his survival. So we really kind of see that through this artwork.
I feel like it's his reminder of who he was before the war, which keeps his human dignity alive. Paulette, as the daughter of two survivors, can you tell us a bit about your father and mother's experiences? Did they share what they went through with you while you were growing up?
You know, is this working? I have to say I didn't know a whole lot. I mean, I knew that they had a camp experience. My dad was considerably older than my mom and didn't really talk much. And if they wanted to talk about anything that happened, they spoke German to each other, and I was not supposed to understand. I kind of figured out a lot of it. We spoke Czech and English at home, but I wasn't taught German, so I had to figure it out. But I knew they had an experience, but my dad really was very silent. And my mom spent her life mourning her own father, who was actually taken to the small fortress in Theresienstadt and systematically tortured and killed within a few weeks. And she lived with that her whole life. And I mean, I remember being a small child and crying that I didn't know him or have a grandfather, because she was just always talking about him. But after my mom's death, which was actually 3 years ago today, I found lots of documents and a lot more things which are on display in the other room. And it sort of opened up more information, including when my dad came to this country. My mom had better English than my dad did. They came in the early 50s. And I think to further his knowledge of English, he enrolled in a Toastmasters course where you learn how to do public speaking, which they always wanted me to do. I should have done. But I found a speech that I kind of would like to share a little bit because it's really like him talking. And it wasn't until I read this that I learned more about his past. Can I do a little bit of that?
Of course.
So this is a speech he gave, I don't know when, in probably the mid-50s. And he says, "Do you remember what happened, what you were doing, Sunday, June 28th, 1914? Now, my dad was born in 1908. He says, "I do. It was the day Archduke Francis Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. I was 6 years old then and was with my parents at the opera at a matinee. The play was not finished. The audience was told in the middle of Act Two what happened, and we were sent home. World War II started shortly after." And he goes on and talks about how he's been a citizen and a persecuted object and all these different categories of humanity. But what I wanted to say is in this chapter, he says, when Hitler took over Czechoslovakia, life changed, and for many thousands, it stopped altogether. I have somehow succeeded to repress all memories of this period, and I never talk about it. I might only mention that I have lost 23 of my relatives in Hitler's concentration camps. When I read this, I was like, I have no idea who these 23 people are. I'm only aware of his mother. So it's just a sign of how he did not share this. So we're piecing it together now.
It's amazing, though, that you get to read it in his words.
That's what I love about this.
Yeah.
It's like he's talking to us.
Exactly. So even if he didn't talk to you about it then,
Exactly. I'm so glad I found this.
that's amazing. And Hagy, as an architect yourself, how do you perceive the relationship between architecture, memory, and the preservation of history?
Well, first of all, congratulations on the exhibit. It's extraordinary. It's exceptional, and I'm so moved as we're walking through it. And congratulations to you, and your father must be gleaming right now. He's singing. So congratulations to all of you. You know, for architects, I think they play a much different role. It's more of it's symbolism and history. We really try to, I believe, or I try to create more of a vessel for what is being depicted, for example, in this building. To take something and be heroic or symbolic will take away from the content. So symbolism is more of an immersion. It's more of an experience than it is something iconic or symbolic. And you can see there's more muted colors and it's more gray, black, white, but the colors come through with the content. And I think that allows the celebration of the historical artifacts or what is trying to be celebrated in other terms. It takes the lead role in symbolism of history. There are little bits and that we try to promote, but to cross cultural lines, to try to cross age and gender, really symbolism needs to play more of a cross-cultural role. So really trying to break down to its most minimal is what's important to us.
And I have another question for you. When did you shift your professional work to focus on spaces like museums and memorials?
With the Holocaust Museum. And so it becomes more of an obsession and a passion, but what we've learned here really does translate into everything we start to do. It's really the subtlety and the emotional aspect that really tries to bring forth from people. That's really how my office has changed. I have changed. And how could you not really with this powerful program?
Thank you so much. Paulette, as we heard, Theresienstadt was a place where many well-known artists, musicians, and writers were deported. Can you give us some insight into your parents' relationships with art and culture and how this played a role in their experiences during the Holocaust?
Well, I can tell you that art and culture played a big role. I'm not sure completely answering that question, but as my dad said, he was a 6-year-old in the opera. My mother could tell you until her dying day every opera she ever saw and who was in it and where it was held and which one was better than the other. And they would listen to classical music, go to the Philharmonic. I mean, they were really into all of that. And my dad was always drawing. I always laugh because when in high school, when we had back to school night and you're supposed to listen to the teacher talk about the quarter or the semester, my dad would be in the back of the room drawing a caricature of the teacher who was speaking. I wish I had it. I can visualize it, but I don't have it anymore. So, yeah. And my mom was friendly with Moritz Müller, the professor. And can I read something else in her
Of
words?
course, please.
So some of the paintings that are on display in the other room were saved by my mother and given to the museum. And she wrote, I found this beautiful letter, again, really well written, that kind of talks about what happened. So this is her. She says, "This is how I came into possession of the sketches by Professor Müller. Before I myself was deported to Theresienstadt in 1942, the Gestapo in Prague, Czechoslovakia, established a forced labor group among Jews called Treuhandstelle, or organized to receive and store, I really should have brought my glasses, store in separate warehouses all the belongings left behind by the deported Jews of Czechoslovakia." And my dad was actually part of that Treuhandstelle, and the caricatures that he draws are of people who were involved in that process, storing, cataloging, moving furniture, jewelry, items. So she continues, "Professor Müller was put in charge of the Kunstlager, the storage of all art objects. I had been directed to work in one department where I met Professor Müller, Later on, when we were both deported to Theresienstadt, I often saw Professor Müller and observed his sketching life as he saw it. He would, for instance, go to the infirmary where he would depict patients, mostly old men in the urology section of the hospital. In some cases, he would even take the patient's name and hometown, possibly with an eye on contacting their survivors after the war. In one instance, for example, he made notations of the ancestry of one of the men, Michael Louis, tying back all the way to the famous 17th century Rabbi Levi, creator of the legendary Golem. When massive transports were being organized from Theresienstadt, beginning with all the old people, in the summer of 1944, Professor Müller was called up too. He was then in his 60s at that time. He gave me the sketches in the hope that I, being younger, perhaps had a better chance of survival than he did. This assumption proved correct. Professor Müller did not survive the death camps. And my mom hid them, then she gave them to a friend of hers in the camps who survived, and they still exist today, and they're in the museum now.
Thank you so much. And do you mind me asking who this letter was written to?
To this museum.
Oh, really?
Beneath the contribution.
Oh, amazing.
It goes on, and I'm always impressed when I read my mom's writing, again, because they were not native speakers, and they made their points really well.
That's amazing. And Christie.
This is the company.
Christie, what are some specific examples from the artworks or writings showcased in the exhibition that illustrate the resilience and bravery of those in Theresienstadt?
There's many. So I think even, any of the artwork, the fact that they were creating artwork is an example of resistance and resiliency, because to be able to create and be creative in such an oppressive and inhumane environment, you're thinking about survival, you're thinking about where is my next meal coming from, you're thinking about not being, tortured or beaten, to be able to still create in that atmosphere is an incredible testament to resilience and resistance. But I would say, to give a specific example, so one of the artists, Leo Haas, was part of this group that were stationed in the drafting office. So basically it was a group of artists who were all put to work making Nazi propaganda because they were all skilled artists. In addition to making the propaganda, they were each creating clandestine artwork as well, depicting what the real life in the camp looked like. So, obviously the Nazis not wanting this information to get out about what the real conditions were like. So that in and of itself, to have the bravery to do that, but then also to go one step further than that, then they attempted to smuggle the artwork out of the camp to get the word out about what was really happening. They're subsequently caught and they're arrested and taken to the small fortress and tortured, along with their families. So Leo Haas and a number of other men, one in particular, Beatrix Fritter, who was a good friend of his. One thing that really also got me when I was doing this research is he's sent there with his wife and 3-year-old child. So Leo Haas manages to survive the brutal torture and is subsequently deported with Beatrix Fritter to Auschwitz. Beatrix Fritter doesn't survive and dies in Auschwitz, and then he's deported to a number of other camps but survives. And goes back to Theresienstadt to recover his artwork from the barrack where he hid it, and also his friend Beatrix Fritter's artwork. So, I mean, just reading those kinds of stories, I have no words to express the resiliency that it would take and the strength to endure something like that. But then also something that's really interesting as well is that, in addition to the artwork, he had the foresight or the understanding to save his friend's artwork who didn't survive and, protect his identity and legacy so that he's not forgotten.
Thank you so much. And could you also discuss the curation process for this exhibition, how you approached selecting artworks, and how you decided on the organization and curation of the pieces?
Yes. So it was definitely a journey, I would say. So we started out with the fact that we knew we had some artwork from Theresienstadt. So we have this incredible collection of Erich Lichtblau-Leskly, which in total is about 140 pieces. So you only see a very small percentage of it. So we knew that we had that, and we had Fred Beckmann sketches on loan, so we knew that we had those. So, and there is, like we talked about before, there's such a proliferation of artistic materials. So we had a really good basis for that, and we knew that it was an interesting subject matter. It was just bringing it all together and figuring out what story we want to tell. So we really kind of also wanted to take visitors on a journey. So when you enter the gallery, you're kind of immediately struck by artwork that depicts the landscape. So we're talking about, Theresienstadt was a fortress that dated back to the 18th century. The Nazis repurposed it as a tool of, control and oppression. So, and that theme is very much in throughout all of the artists that we depicted. You see the landscape, and, Fred in particular had that very skilled eye that documenting kind of the architecture of the fortress. And then, we wanted to draw out some of the other themes as well. So we talk about the propaganda aspect because Theresienstadt was an important propaganda tool for the Nazis. As you were saying earlier, it was positioned as this spa town so that people who were prominent in society, if there was questions asked, the Nazis could say, well, they're being sent to this lovely place. They went so far as to create a propaganda film in an effort to dissuade the Red Cross and convince the Red Cross who was visiting that it was actually a pleasant place to live. They planted gardens, they beautified the ghetto. So it was really, and Erich Lichtblau-Leskly's work really kind of depicts those different processes in terms of the propaganda. And then a lot of the kind of pieces that we have obviously really document what the true conditions were like. So, the really overcrowding of the camp, the just abundance of disease and really, horrible conditions. And we kind of intentionally, if you look through the gallery, you see the left side wall is much more kind of spread out. The pieces aren't as crowded, but when you get to that part of it, we kind of wanted to mirror that feeling of it being a really cramped space. So it's very tightly hung. There are a lot of pieces depicting, the brutality and the horrendous kind of situation that was Theresienstadt. And then we kind of come out of that to talk about resistance. So you'll see the very last section, really, there's much more color. And you're talking about, artwork is obviously resistance, but also, very small depictions of resistance. So something as simple as smuggling flowers into the ghetto, which when you think about it doesn't maybe make much sense, but you're thinking about someone who at risk to themselves, want to hold on to this piece of humanity and make their living conditions a little bit brighter. Through to, the depiction of the women's barracks holding Shabbat. So trying to hold on to your Jewish identity in the face of just overwhelming adversity. So then I probably just want to also talk a little bit about, some of the artifacts that we have on display, not just the artwork. So I have to say that the whole process has really been like an onion because it's just become really layered for me. So we started out with this very kind of small idea about what we wanted to do and had the artwork and things started to come together then. And in unrelated things to do with my job, had a meeting with a donor who had donated some materials previously, and we were speaking about something unrelated, and he mentioned to me, I had donated this small Torah scroll that you have on display. And I was like, we've been trying to figure out the provenance to that. Like, could you tell me about it? Yes, it belonged to my family member in Theresienstadt. So I was like, okay, well, tell me more. So he tells me about this. I'm not sure if he's here, if he was supposed to be coming, but he tells me about this family member of his who was in Theresienstadt. So her name was Alma, and she was deported to Theresienstadt at 67 years old in 1942. And she was forced to work as a seamstress. And at some point during her imprisonment, she encounters a rabbi who had discovered he was going to be deported. So he gives her these tiny scrolls. They're like this size. One is a Torah scroll, one is a Megillah Esther. And he says, please keep them safe. And so she does. And she goes so far as to create a protective bag for them to keep them safe. So something like that, it just like to understand the importance of holding on to your culture, holding on to your spiritual aspects. Like, I just, you can't even begin to imagine the type of strength that would take.
Amazing. One thing I really took away from the exhibit was the enduring spirit of the Jewish people throughout the Holocaust and how they used art to really keep that message alive. And it's still a testament that we can talk about today as we're all sitting here. Paulette, your father was an architect before, in a way during, and after the Holocaust. How did architecture play a role in shaping his identity and who he was?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I don't know. I mean, he definitely saw the world, was able to draw what he saw, and I think there's a certain discipline to being an architect. He actually, when he came to this country, he spent most of his time working as a specification writer, which is even more detailed, probably more boring, but he never took the whatever exam in this country, so he did sort of other kind of work. But it definitely colored his view on what he saw and gave him the talent to depict what he saw. He was always painting, always drawing.
That's amazing. Did he pass that talent on to you?
Not at all.
And Hagy, how do you believe design and art can contribute to the broader narrative of Holocaust education and remembrance, particularly for younger generations?
Let's look at this exhibit for one moment as try to answer the question, because it's a big question. If you look at your father, Paulette, and we spoke very briefly, Paulette and I, and Paulette showed me the difference between one of the pieces of drawings that he had very meticulously shown his talent as an architect. The windows are perfectly spaced, they're perfectly, measured and scaled, and then you showed me his character. So, exactly, which is totally different. But that's, I think, extraordinary in seeing the artifact and the expressive at the same time. You have the historical artifact that your father is actually depicting, in real kind of evidence, that we could sit and say, yes, that was no longer there. We actually have a survey of what that building did look like and the the horrible horrors that occurred inside. But then you see his expressive talents and his resistance. And I think architects may be possessed with that unfortunate ability, because that is possibly the best way to describe, this balance of the two that have to coexist. How do you bring that forth to kids? The world changes every day, and kids are changing faster than we can imagine. When we started this museum, we started with a technology that is so incredibly outdated that I'm shocked that we even attempted to do something technological, which allows us to rethink and learn from our mistakes and say, maybe the intuitive is a lot more powerful than trying to keep up with how do you teach students or kids these days. Maybe it's how you try to communicate humanity to individuals. That's, I think, the most important thing to do, regardless of age. It will disseminate, but humanity through no filtration, authentic expressiveness is probably the best way. Teaching is through symbolism. I don't think personally works, because each person, each individual comes to their existence with their own past, their own traumas, their own experiences. So maybe symbolism to one person is different to another, especially children coming to this country. So perhaps allowing the information or dialogue to exist as it is, and allowing people and kids to come up with their own interpretation, and hoping that it is really based in truth and authenticity. So we don't try to teach kids or try to teach to a younger generation, only knowing that there's yet another generation coming after that may be different. So you just try to teach a more humane, authentic correspondence of information and ideas.
Thank you so much, and I wanted to thank all the panelists for participating in this panel discussion today. And I just wanted to thank the audience for being here today. I know this is the beginning of the opening, but I hope this is not the end of the conversation. And I hope that when you're looking through the gallery, you find a piece that's meaningful to you, and can figure out how, or just think about how these artists wanted to keep their humanity. And I want you to think about that as you go through the world where humanity is constantly being questioned. So I just want us to keep that with us today. And I just want to thank everyone for being here today. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists?
This is not specifically about this exhibit, but it's the first time I've actually been here. I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit hidden. So even though I knew the park was here, I've never actually known exactly where this was. But I will tell you, my friend and I, Jessie, saw something I thought was fascinating. You mentioned technology. You said, I think you were having some trouble getting into technology or making it your friend. You really should. There's a part right over there, I think it's part of the actual museum, but it's on the edge of this exhibit, which is a wonderful exhibit. And it's where you sit in a booth, which is glass enclosed, you know what I'm talking about, where you actually have a survivor of the Holocaust, and somehow it's kind of like an Alexa. You say a question, and she hears you and answers. We sat there for like 25 minutes, just asking questions, and it was the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. It was just wonderful. I kept telling him, one of these days there'll probably be a hologram version. But it was amazing, and I hope you do more stuff like that, because that really brings it to life when you do stuff like that.
Absolutely. So that's our Dimensions and Testimony exhibition in partnership with the USC Shoah Foundation. And in our expansion, we're actually creating a theater so that whole classrooms can interact with the Holocaust survivor. So we're really starting to think about a time when Holocaust survivors are no longer with us, and a way to keep engaging future generations and keeping that conversation going and continually learning from the survivors and their experiences. So thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else? Yes.
I was just curious, from Theresienstadt, and when they said that they smuggled their art out, how was it smuggled out?
So I'm not sure that it's so well documented, but I would say that, you know, it wasn't just Nazi guards that were guards in the camp. There was Czech guards, there was other, you know, people present, and then prisoners were also maybe would have work details, so there could be, and you'll actually see potentially if you have a look, there are some documents in the cases related to Fred where they had like a work permit where they could leave the camp for a specific work detail that they were on. So there would have potentially been opportunity for them to maybe smuggle their artwork out through those means.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Julia, and I'm an artist and researcher actually in memory studies. And my question is about how you consider art as a tool for healing. Yeah, so that's a tremendous thing that happened before. And I just want to see the perspective on that. And from my side, I'm working with artist survivors from Iran. And it's so close to me, and I'm so fascinated about this music, which I didn't see yet. So I'm just waiting for the panel first. So yeah, this is my question: how do you see the art as a tool for creation and for healing the trauma?
Me? Or?
I mean, a dual.
So I would definitely say that, yes, for sure, art can be a means of healing. And actually, we have a number of survivors in our community who speak about their experiences at the museum and maybe were some sort of artist before the Holocaust, but many had picked it up after as a means of like it's therapeutic, really, and a means of kind of dealing with this traumatic situation that you have been through. And definitely as a means to kind of heal from that. So we do hear like kind of first-hand accounts about how that has really kind of benefited people. And, you know, even from like a kind of, if you're talking about the artwork in this exhibit, you know, it is a means of resistance, but also healing, because they're, you know, trying to deal with the trauma and the horribleness that they're surrounded with. So holding on to something that's beautiful or creative is, in a sense, a healing element, I would say.
I would also love to add to that at the museum we do use art as a tool to bridge the gap between different communities and also an intergenerational gap. So as the creative programs manager at the museum, I oversee a program that it's called Share Our Stories, where it's a 3-part program where we bring Title I students to the museum for a tour of the museum. They meet with a Holocaust survivor to hear their story, and then the culmination of the program is an art reflection, where they actually welcome me back to their schools, and we focus on themes relating to perseverance in their lives, or how to be an upstander. So art is really used at our museum in many ways as a way to start conversations, bridge gaps between communities, and heal one another. So thank you for that question. I love that. Any other questions? Yes.
Paulette, you said that your dad did not share his experiences in the Holocaust. Did your mom speak about her experiences, and did she share any of your dad's experiences that you may have told her?
You know, I think my mom didn't really start talking about the Holocaust until Schindler's List came out, and my dad was long gone by then. I really did not get a lot of information out of my dad. And we'd have to like sit her down and try to interview her. I know, like before we went on March of the Living, we kind of tried to get information, but she wasn't super forthcoming with it. And she didn't know.
She never shared any of her dad's experiences?
Well, my dad had a different experience, because before the war he was actually married to a non-Jewish woman, and that allowed him to have a little bit less of a horrific experience. So I'm aware of that, but no, I did not get a whole lot, which is why this is like a treasure hunt now. I'm finding a lot more information in the last few years. And even my dad, up until the time he died, he had no idea what happened to his mother. He just assumed that after Theresienstadt, he knew she went on a transport. He assumed that she was sent to Auschwitz. And we've come to learn that she was actually sent on, there were 3 transports from Theresienstadt that went to Riga. that were basically shot on arrival. And she was on that, but he never knew, which is probably a good thing because it would break his heart.
Yeah. How many people were in Theresienstadt when it was liberated, I assume, by the Soviets?
I don't know that answer.
I know that in 1942, at the height of the camp, there were 60,000 people there. I'm not sure the exact number at liberation, so I'm sorry about that. Yes, Susanna.
First of all, I'm Susanna. I'm an educator and also here in the museum, and I wanted to tell you how much I appreciate the topic of this exhibit. Also, as somebody who grew up in that part of the world, I have a more personal question for Paulette. I was wondering in the letter that your father wrote, you mentioned the 23 relatives that you never heard about before, and as somebody who likes to search for my own roots, my family roots, I was wondering if you've ever pursued that journey, and if you happen to know more.
You know, I haven't, there's probably better ways to do it. I'm on genie.com and I've looked at we have a lot of his ancestral information because he actually hired a genealogist before the war. So I can trace back to like the 1700s, but I can't guess who's missing. You know, it's just, I haven't been able to. Michael, if you're still here, maybe that's one of your projects.
Why did you hire a genealogist?
Because he was interested, I guess. He knew Danny was going to have a project one day. We need that information.
Any other questions? Yes.
This is on a parallel to what we're talking about. But I was in New York in November to the Jewish Cultural Museum down in Battery Park, and they had a special exhibit of the Danes saving the Jews. And one part, I was hysterical crying, but there's one area that showed that the Danes made some sort of a thing with the Nazis to get all of the Jews out of Theresienstadt that were Danish. They called it the White Bus, and they took all the Jews in this white bus and they sent them to Sweden, and they hid them in Sweden. So were those kinds of things happening, or was this something special with the Danes that they had with the Germans and Nazis?
I haven't heard about that, but I do know that the Red Cross visit to Theresienstadt was because of the Danish government fighting back against the treatment of the Jews, and so they wanted proof that the Nazis were not.
Yeah, it was pressure from the Danish government to say, like, what is happening in this camp? Like, show us how they're being treated. And so the Nazis eventually relented and allowed the Red Cross delegation to enter the camp, which was what prompted them to, quote unquote, beautify the camp, so plant gardens, and, you know, they did a mass deportation to make it less crowded. They, you know, put away the elderly people who are more, you know, susceptible and vulnerable to falling ill from the conditions, like hid them away so they wouldn't be seen. I had heard, I can't remember whose testimony it was, but one survivor talk about how, you know, they set up like the what do you get? The faucet. I was going to call it a tap, but that's an Australian word. I don't know. The faucets. You know, if just one of the Red Cross members had like gone and turned it on, it wouldn't have had any water. So there was this like facade that was built in terms of showing the Red Cross, yes, look, they're being treated well. This is a great place to live. But obviously that was not the case.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yes.
Part of that show was that they had currency, and my dad was the artist who drew the picture of the Moses holding the Ten Commandments on that currency, and it was like 5 or 6 different denominations, and it was all to pull the wool over the UN's Red Cross's.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's also a little bit of it is in there.
So there's actually also.
But it was like the bakery, like
Yeah.
the idea you could go and buy anything.
And you can see the currency on display. So actually, one of the families who's here tonight, their mother and grandfather and grandmother were in Theresienstadt, and some of their artifacts are on display. And two of the artifacts that they had donated is actually a bank book. And their mother talks about in her testimony how they were paid for their slave labor because they were employed with this currency that was worthless, and they were given a bank book to show, look, you're being paid. So that was as far-reaching as the propaganda went.
Any other questions? I just wanted to thank everyone for being here again tonight on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. Thank you so much.